Okay. At the end of Perek Chavtes, the Alter Rebbe, the part that we didn't read inside, just the last thing, the Alter Rebbe brings an idea. He brings that we find in Chumash that, here we are, it's this week's Parsha, that the spies went into Eretz Yisrael. When they came out, they said that the people living in the land Hashem can't take them out. They're too powerful. And then Moshe came back and he told the Jewish people, he said, God is angry at you. He's not going to take you into the land. You're going to die over here 40 years. And then what was their response? Let's go up. We're going to go to Israel. They woke up in the morning. The next morning, we're going. So the Alter Rebbe asks a question. If they thought the day before that Hashem doesn't have the ability to take them in, what happened the next day? There was no miracle. He didn't show any miracle in between. It wasn't like other instances,
No, but it switched the mind because probably the Moshe was more higher in hierarchy, so that's why.
Right. So he says that just by popping the bubble of the animal soul, so to speak, they became faithful again. They became believing, and that's the Alter Rebbe's point. He says if you're davening and you're serving Hashem, and then suddenly you're like, oh, I don't even believe in Hashem. I'm not sure. He's like, yeah, it's like a convenient distraction right now. It's like we're learning something. You're like, wait, I don't know if I believe in God. He's like, okay, so deal with that. Make time to deal with that separately. Don't recognize that really what it is a distraction. It's a technique that's being done right now. Don't address it. Don't in other words, don't get lost in the. Okay. So anyway, that's the end of Perek Chavtes. But as a key, let's remember that the idea of Perek Chavtes, what the Alter Rebbe was saying is that you have a person who sees that he's numb, his heart is numb, he can't serve Hashem. And the Alter Rebbe said, what's the eitzah, what's the advice, what's the guidance, how to deal with it? That he has to go through a process of he has to put himself down. And the Alter Rebbe, the points that he made, to put yourself down, to be humbled, was two things. First of all, that we have the capacity to desire things that are against Hashem's will. So in that way, we're even lesser than an animal. We're lesser than a Baal Chai. Those things are not by choice. That's just by the way we're born. And then he says there are things that we chose. There are things that we did in our life that we have to do tshuva for still. Even though we did tshuva in the past, but Shmuley, don't close it all the way. So anyway, that was Perek Chavtes. Let's learn Perek Lamed. Perek Lamed. Oid zeis yosim eliba. You should also take to heart. Hasidim would say that Perek Lamed is, it follows, in order to come to Perek Lamed, you have to have completed and absorbed the meditations of Perek Chavtes. It's not like, you could choose either Chavtes or Lamed. Either the ideas in the previous chapter or the new ideas. No, they follow, there's a progression. It says, Oidiyas Yosem Aliba, you should also take to heart, Lekayim, to fulfill Maimer Azal. What it says in Pirkei Avos. In Pirkei Avos it says, Vehevei shvar ruach bifnei kol ha'adam. You should be exceedingly humble before every person. That's the Mishnah. So now look at the phrase. The Alter Rebbe says the word vehevei, you should be, means be'emes la'amitai, in truth. Meaning, the Mishnah is not telling us to make believe. The Mishnah is not saying, you know what, when you're imagine you're a religious guy and you do everything right and you do mitzvahs, you're a Beinani, and you encounter someone who's, everyone knows by their own, I'm not going to say by their own declaration, but they're not frum. They don't study Torah. They're not frum. They're not, whatever it is. Or I would let's take it step by step. Let's say they're religious, but they're barely religious. What we call today Chabad light. Okay, so they look it, but they're not. I mean, when they walk into a kosher restaurant, they're not asking what's the hechsher, who's the rabbi giving the hechsher. They're not careful. So here we have one person who's very careful. They're always learning. They're always davening with intention. And you have another person, they're talking through the whole davening, they're not careful. So the Mishnah says that the religious person, the more religious person, should be humble before this simple person. And it says not as a way of making believe, not as a courtesy. It's not, when you come to the door, why don't you open the door and let them walk in front of you? Be respectful to them. That's not what the Mishnah is saying. The Mishnah says you should truthfully believe that you're on a lower level. You should be humble before that person, that he has greatness that's great beyond you. Bifnei kol ha'adam mamash, literally for every single person, meaning even someone who Torah defines him as a Rasha. In other words, you're going to say, well, we don't really know if a person is a Beinani or not. No, here someone, Torah says that this person is a Rasha, you should be humble before him. Afilu bifnei kal shebekalim, even a person who treats mitzvahs lightly, flippantly. How is that? Fahainu. Why is that? Why should I consider myself lower than, inferior to someone who's a kal shebekalim? So he says, "V'hainu al pi maimer azal." You have to follow the teaching of the sages. Al tadin es chavercha ad shetagia limkemei. Do not judge your friend until you reach his place, right? Until you stand in his shoes, until you walk in his steps. So the Alter Rebbe is going to use this Mishnah to explain the previous Mishnah. What's he saying? Here you have a person who treats mitzvahs lightly, flippantly. But you have to know, this person who you see as a kal shebekalim, his conditions, the place where he is, causes him to sin. The Alter Rebbe paints a particular picture. Lias parnasasai, how does he earn his livelihood? Leilech b'shuk kalayim, he's in the market all day. And what does it mean to be in the market? He sees temptation. He is bombarded by temptation. He sees the advertising. He's exposed to what goes on in the world. The Alter Rebbe continues, V'liyos miyoshvei kronos. He's from the people who sit on the street corners. That's what his job is. He's waiting to see if he could make a deal. And what's he doing? He's sitting around on the corners. Now, there's a lot of insight that's needed here. We have to talk about many little points here for a moment. First of all, in the Alter Rebbe, in the Siddur, he has a different version of the text. Bifnei kol adam, not ha-adam. What's the difference? The difference when we say adam or ha-adam is
the same like Abraham. Like the same like when he went down to the Egypt.
Right, but here Adam alone, Aleph Dalet Mem, refers to Jews. Ha-Adam is all human beings, with a hey at the beginning. And here the Alter Rebbe adds with the hey. In other words, a person should be humble before everyone, not only in front of other Jews, even non-Jews. To be humble before every person. Truly. Not as a show, but to be truly humble. And the Rebbe speaks about, why that is and the changes. That's one thing. The other thing is, when we talk about the conditions of the person, a person who goes in the market, so even a person who goes in the market, if you go in the market with purpose, you're busy. You're in sales. You're a salesman. You're going to this store, to that store. You have a mission. You're distracted. But a person who sits on the street corners and waits for people to approach them is just sitting around. And the people sitting there, what are they doing all day? Talking silly things. V'liyas. So it's an even lower level. The ein of royas kalatayvis, his eyes see all the temptation. And what happens? V'ayin roya, the eye sees. V'halev chaymed, and the heart desires. The Gemara says that the ayin, that the eye is a sarsur. The eye is a broker for sin. Right? That the eye sees, and then it draws, and then the heart desires. The heart brings, right? The heart is the salesperson. The eye is the salesperson marketing to the heart that the heart is like, I want this. If I didn't see it, I wouldn't want it. But now that I saw it, I have to have it. So ha'ayin roya, v'halev chaymed. Now, once the heart desires, v'yitzrei boyer, his animal soul is burning, ketanur boyara me'oife, like a baker's oven. Right? A baker's oven is much more hot. The temperature is much higher. It's fiery. It's continuous. Like he brings from the Navi, who boyer ke'esh lahava v'gomer, meaning like you have a person whose Yetzer Hara is contained. They're mostly in a good environment. They're mostly learning. They're in a base medrash. They're in a study hall. They're sitting in Yagdal Torah. They're sitting in the men's section by the wedding. They play the music for the men. It's not the photographer. He's not going also to the women. So he's not exposed. He doesn't see, so nice to see you. It's been a long time. Shehecheyanu. Thank you for coming. Could you open up to Tanya to the right page, Perek Lamed, please? So, but a person who's exposed, a person who goes out in the street, so his eye sees and his heart desires. And once the heart is on fire, it's very, very difficult to control. It's very difficult to say, now that I really want this. It's like for some people, once they see the new phone, they have to get it. There's no way. They can't not get it. They have to get it. It's like, that's it. It's too late. On the contrary, however, someone who's very little in the market, most of the time he's at home. He studies Torah. He's doing mitzvahs. So how could you compare the challenge? How could you compare the nisoyin? How could you compare the test that he has? Now the Alter Rebbe says like this: let's say you're the Beinani who actually you have to work all day. You're out in the market, but there's a possibility that you're not such a fiery, passionate. You're not intense. You're not so lustful by nature. Some people, they're cool. They don't get so so excited. The Yetzer Hara is not the same by every person. The Alter Rebbe is not trying to say that by some people the Yetzer Hara is bigger. But he's trying to say some people the Yetzer Hara is like a bull. Some people it's like a goat. Some people it's like a sheep. So it's a calmer Yetzer Hara. So you can't. So when you look at another person who sins, you have to know. You have to say to yourself, "Look, what kind of tests does this person experience?" I don't know. I don't know if I would be in that position. I don't know if I would be able to be oimid bin esoyin. I don't know if I would be able to withstand the temptation. The hine be'emes. The truth is, says the Alter Rebbe, he takes a break for a minute. Right. He says the truth is that gam mishu mechumem ma'id b'tivei, even someone who is extremely passionate by nature. Uparnasasehi, and his job is liyas miyesh ve'kronas kol hayom. He's got to be out in the street all day. Ein loy shum hitnatzlut. There is no excuse for sinning. Al chatov. I'm not saying this. In other words, the Alter Rebbe says, remember, we're not here to justify people sinning. Umikre Rasha Gomor. He is called a complete Rasha. There's a discussion in the commentaries here on the Tanya why the Alter Rebbe says that he's called a complete Rasha. So one approach is that what's happening here is the Alter Rebbe says, well, his eyes saw and his heart was awakened. So in the chitzonius of the person and in the pnimius of the person, they're experiencing this turmoil. He means a complete Rasha in the sense that the whole person is drawn, is attracted to whatever the temptation is. He's called a Rasha Gomor, Al Asher Ein Pachad Elikim Leneged Einov. So I'm just going to tell it to you without creating a question and reading further. I'll just tell you the answer. I'll just go straight to the answer. The Rebbe's father has a discussion here. In this line, the Alter Rebbe says Pachad Elikim. In a few lines, he's going to say Pachad Hashem. Okay, so he says, what's the difference? He says, Pachad Elikim leneged einov. Leneged einov means in front of your eyes. In front of your eyes is the lower form of fear of heaven is to keep yourself away from temptation to begin with. A person who has Yireh Shamayim, a God-fearing Jew, limits his exposure. The Gemara talks about two sages, Rabbi Oishia, I don't remember who the other one was, who would sell shoes in the red district where they lived. I don't know what city it was.
Netherlands.
Huh?
Netherlands.
In the Netherlands. Yeah, in Amsterdam. Where was it?
Yeah.
So, and it says in the Gemara that they never looked up to see their clients. And so what the Alter Rebbe is saying is, you have a responsibility that the fear of heaven should be sufficient enough to keep you from looking everywhere. So, leneged einov, to block your eyes, not to look where you shouldn't. Ki hoya leili isapik, you should control yourself. V'limshel al ruach tavasi shebelibay, and contain your taiva, right? Your desire. Mipnei pachad Hashem haroya kol ma'asav. And now further, if a person looked where he shouldn't, so now it engaged the heart. To win over the heart, you need a deeper level of godliness. That's why he says Hashem, because right, to have the power once it's inside your heart, to say a person is burning with temptation, and they should control it. You need a deeper power. Because naturally Hashem set it up that the mind is able to restrict the heart. Not to control the heart, but to restrict the heart. Now he says like this. Now v'hine be'emes, the truth is, so there's no excuse, right? There's no excuse for sinning. But now the Alter Rebbe says like this. The truth is, shehi milchama gedoyla va'atzuma. It is an incredible battle. Lishba, in other words, yes. Yes, the Torah teaches us that we have to be a frum person. And to be a frum person means that we have to combat and control and resist temptation. But let's be honest, it's not easy. It's not easy, lishbayr hayetzer, to break the drive of the animal soul, habayr ke'esh lahava. That's the fiery, mipnei pachad Hashem. Because you're thinking about Hashem and you're afraid of Hashem. And the Alter Rebbe says, incredible words, Ukemoi nisoyin mamash, it's literally like a test. Meaning, when a person, what do we talk about in Perek Yud Ches? The people who are threatened that they have to bow to an idol or someone's going to take their life away. It's a moment of test, nisoyin. The Alter Rebbe says this equals asking someone to resist such temptation is equal to. It's literally such a test. He says Mali Sur Mera. Mali Sur Mera, Mali Vasetoiv. Yeah, but here, yeah. Ukemoinus v'hilkach, therefore. So let's read the words, then Tzarich, every Beinani, every person has to think about things like this. Tzarich kol Adam, every person must. Lefi mashahu mekoimei umadrigase ba'avedis Hashem, depending on their. I just want to say this paragraph is one of the most important in the entire Tanya. Just this paragraph. Every person, based on their level in serving Hashem, lishkoil, velivchain, they have to weigh and check be'atzmai. They have to weigh in themselves. Imu eved Hashem. Do I serve Hashem comparably be'erech ubechinas milchama atzuma kazeh? Do I serve Hashem with the kind of battle and such a test? I share this story when I teach this Perek Tanya. I had the schus to be a counselor at the Ivy League Torah Study Program for many years. One year, almost every year, there was a student that came that was involved with a goy. One of the students that came that was in a relationship. And it wasn't a simple thing. It was someone that was in a relationship. I mean, story after story. I'm thinking in my mind, That's Mazonis, yeah. Just right? And there was one part. I'm thinking now about one particular story. It was a girl, and she was a little bit like an eccentric personality. That till she found someone, she wasn't someone that it was so easy to be in a relationship, and she was very, very, very serious. They were planning on getting married. It was, and then towards the end of the program, her friends, whatever, they were talking, and they said, "Look, if you go back home, if you don't break up while you're here, it's not going to happen." And she just meditated and cried and just incredible and picked up the phone, and I'm thinking to myself, what are my tests in my Yiddishkeit compared to this person? Right? Did I ever have to make such a choice? It's like the Alter Rebbe is saying, you have to weigh, you have to think about the kind of tests. Now, realize also, that person passed the test. Right? Even if they would fail the test, it's like, we imagine.
They still had that big war. It means until they failed, they were still
But she won. She passed, right? She did it. Do I do it? In other words, in much smaller tests. It's like the minion's going too slow. I'm out of here. You know what I mean? It's like. So that's one thing. The second thing I'll say is also just something that I was taught when we were studying this in yeshiva. One of our teachers, he framed it like this, and this is a little bit of a departure from the text of the Tanya, but it's very powerful idea. He said, that you go on miftzayim. You go Friday, you go put tefillin on with someone. You have a relationship with them, and it's amazing. We're all getting the same call. Don't worry, they want you to vote for Cuomo. It's all happening at the same time. Anyway, the robocalls. Okay, so imagine you're going on miftzayim. You go, there's a guy, you go to one office. Every Friday you go, they put on tefillin. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't, whatever. Imagine you come to a guy, he never puts on tefillin. He's not interested. He talks to you a few minutes, and that's it. On the wall, there are pictures, not tznius pictures on the walls, whatever it is. Then you come in, and you say, Jack, next week, Wednesday is Yom Kippur. Don't forget, next week's Wednesday is Yom Kippur. He's like, Rabbi, who do you think I am? Yom Kippur? What do you mean? Every year I go to synagogue, I fast. Right? Now, this guy, he doesn't know about Chitas and Rambam and everything. Imagine that he would learn that the Chabad people, they do Chitas. When he sees me, in his mind, everything that the Rebbe says, I do. That would be a basic expectation. He would say, Rabbi, I heard there's this thing in Chabad, they do Rambam. How's your Rambam coming along? What am I going to tell him? Oh, I just read the words. So what ends up happening is that person, by social standard, by the societal expectation, he's coming in higher than expectation. Because I thought Yom Kippur he doesn't fast, and suddenly I find out that he does more than society thinks. For me, what society thinks about me, I'm in trouble. So I'm not living up to the expectation, and he's exceeding the expectation. So just from that perspective, we should be more humble. To be a shval ruach b'fnei kol adam, in front of every person. So it was a very interesting way that's framed. And obviously you could think about the psychological, like the core, right? The root cause of all of that, right? The truth. Anyway, so that's what Alter Rebbe says. We have to measure. And he says, the Alter Rebbe now he speaks about a nuance. The Beinani, he says, I don't understand. I don't do any sins. So you're saying, yeah, but even though you don't sin, but you're also not fighting such a war. But that guy sins. How could you compare? That guy does. You're saying, well, you could be better. Okay, fine, I could be better. But that guy's bad.
But he doesn't sin always.
Doesn't matter. Well, wait, the Alter Rebbe is going to frame it. Let's say first he says, "B'bchinas v'asei tov." In other words, first Alter Rebbe has to explain can I have battles? I'm not sinning. I keep Shabbos. So he says, the Beinani has to have battles b'bchinas v'asei tov, in doing the right thing. Kegoin, for example, ba'avodas hatfila, tefillah bekavana. When it comes to davening, one layer of davening is to connect to Hashem. In other words, one level is to say the words. One level is to understand the words. One level is to meditate a little, right? Connection. I want to be connected to Hashem. So, tefillah is lishpeich nafshe lifnei Hashem b'chol kochei mamish. A person should fight and push themselves literally to pour out his heart with every ounce of his strength ad mitzui hanefesh. Like the people said when Reb Nissen Nemenov came and there was no heat in 770, he came here always in February. He would come Yud Shvat. And one year there was no heat. And he was davening and someone went to call him. And he turned around and he was dripping sweat. It was, it's freezing cold. But he was davening with such intensity. Ad mitzvah nefesh, literally wringing out your heart. You daven with all your might. Your back is hurting, your neck is hurting, your throat is dry. You're like, you can't. With all your might, your whole mitzias. Ulehilochem im gufay, to fight your body, the laziness, the resistance, the nefesh habam is shaboy, to push back against your animal soul, hamoinim hakavana, that get in the way, and they don't want you to be so engrossed, so involved, and you keep pushing, and you do it.
This is something very interesting.
Yeah.
It's usually the same type of person that's cool when it comes to other things and doesn't have that mechama, then all of a sudden that means to turn on a fire.
Right. In other words, this guy.
People that are fighting with the Yetzer Hara,
that
to come and have a tafas and nefesh, they're on fire.
Right. Good.
This is not a mechama tzuma for them.
Right. Good. The Muhammad with a mighty war, with incredible intensity. Ulevatsham, to crush the animal soul. Ulekatzam, to grate them, like the little pieces. Ke'ofar, ke'edem atfilah, before davening, as a preparation for davening, to make them nothing. You're not going to allow yourself to be distracted by anything. Ke'edem atfilah, shachris va'arvis, morning and evening, midday yoim beyoim. To be consistent, not just when you're inspired, not just when you wake up spiritually excited, every single day, midday yom b'yom. Why doesn't he say mincha? Hasidim say two reasons. One is because the meditation of Shachris is meant to be carried over to mincha. That's one reason. The other reason is because mincha, you're tearing yourself away from your work. So that process of tearing yourself away from the work, that's the preparation for mincha. You don't need, in addition to that, you also need a meditation. No, that's what it is. That's the hachana. That's the preparation. The gam b'shas tefillah, and then that's to prepare for davening. And then during davening, liyagea atzmei, to exert yourself, biyagias nefesh, to with your mind. V'yigias basar. The Alter Rebbe is going to explain in chapter 42 these two types of exertions of Yegias Nefesh and Yegias Basar. To crush your body, Hiruri Tshuva, and to think deeply for extended periods, as will be explained. I'm going to go a little bit quicker. The kol, you see the dot? The kol sheloi higia lidei midazu. Anyone who hasn't attained such a level of lihilachim im gufay, to fight with his body, milchama atzuma kazu, with such a fight, hasn't scratched the surface of what it's like to be a bulvan. Yeah, to be out in the street and be faced by all the temptation. How could you compare? It's adayin lahigia. You didn't touch. You didn't lebechinas ve'erech milchamas hayetzer habeir keish lahava. By those people whose Yetzer Hara is firing, flaming, is lit on fire. Liyas nichna v'nishbar mipnei pachad Hashem. To be completely controlled and suppressed Out of fear of Hashem.
Putting out the fire.
You know, you meet a guy, he looks like he'll do any sin in the world, and then suddenly he tells you that he has values. Well, I honor my word. Or whatever it is, right? You know, I would never, with such a person, he would never, such a woman or whatever. He has values. V'chein, as well, be'inyan birchas hamazon. Right? When it comes to benching, to bench with kavanah, say every word clearly. It's a mitzvah min ha-Torah. Then he says, v'chol birchas hanen, all the mitzvahs that we make on food, which is rabbinic. And v'ha-mitzvahs b'kavanah. When a person does a mitzvah, every mitzvah that you do, to remember that you're fulfilling a mitzvah for Hashem, and not to do it by rote, with intent, to be fully present. Everyone knows how difficult it is to be present. Ve'ein tzarich loimer, says the Alter Rebbe, I don't have to tell you, obviously, that kavanas ha-mitzvahs lishma, that you shouldn't do mitzvahs for ulterior motives. I have a job. If I won't be religious, I'll lose my job. So that's not lishma. To really do a mitzvah for the sake of Hashem, without any ulterior motives. V'chein, also, the inyan esek limud ha-Torah, when it comes to Torah study. What happens? Lil maid harbe yoser. You gotta learn a lot more than your nature. If you want to compare your fight, your battle, to the battle of, like I mentioned before, then you gotta be learning every split second. You have to be pushing yourself to learn deep things.
For some people, that's just learning one mission.
But he's gonna say, Lil maid harbe yoser, much more mechefze oretzayne than his desire. Lefitive orgiluse, according to his nature, according to his habit. You have to learn much more. And how do you do that? Al yedei milchama atzoma im gufa. You got to fight with your body. You got to push yourself, put yourself. I've mentioned this in the shul in the past. I repeat it from time to time. I remember Rabbi Ezra Shochat was speaking. He was giving a speech. And he said, every once in a while I'm learning and I come to a difficult passage or whatever it is. I'm like, let me go to the next passage. Okay, what was it? Why, here's this Tosfos, it's hard. Let me go to the next Tosfos. What do you mean? No. The Alter Rebbe is saying, don't take the easy route. You gotta just... A person who learns a little more than his nature, that is a mucha ktana. That's a small battle. It's like, I learned 10 more minutes. Mazel tov. Ve'ein lo erech. It's incomparable. There's no comparison. There's no value to it. V'dimyan, no comparison in Muhammad's hayetzer abeir keish, with someone who has a passionate, burning yetzer hara. The mikra rasha gomor. For that person on the street, he's called a Rasha Gomer. If he doesn't win his battle, he's a Rasha. Right? Imagine the guy walks by, his friends, they're selling drugs. They left on the table piles of cash, not to take a bundle. He forgets that they'll kill him. But for the meantime, he's right. It's a big temptation. Now the Alter Rebbe addresses again, but you're saying, I don't understand. My area of battle is to do good, to do more good. But that guy sins. I don't sin. Says the Alter Rebbe, Umali bechina sur meira. What's the difference if your weakness is that you don't separate from evil? Umali bechinas v'asei tov. What's the difference if your issue is that you don't do good? It's all decrees of the king. I want to explain what the Alter Rebbe is saying. From the position of the government, from the position of the court, when a person commits a crime, different crimes have different punishments. Some have 2 years prison, 5 years prison, 10 years prison, a penalty, maximum 20 years life. From the law, in other words, from the position of government, crimes there are different types of crimes by the different way that they impact society. It has to be in the measure of the impact. from the position of the king, right? What we refer to as the king, when a king gives an order, you can't, then that's it. Because the king said it, you have to do it. If a person doesn't do it, they rebelled against the king. They're chayiv misa, they're capital punishment. Once it's coming from the king, all mitzvahs are the same. If you don't do something, no matter what the king says, as significant or as insignificant that it is, whoever doesn't keep the law is put to death. So from the position of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, from the position of Hashem, there's no difference. You did more, you did better. V'chein b'shar mitzvahs, so too with all other mitzvahs, u'befrat b'davar shebamomin, k'mei avedes hatzdaka u'chai gavna. I'll explain what... Yeah. Okay. When we say asay toiv, the way the Alter Rebbe is phrasing here, asay toiv, do good, to be a do-gooder, I don't know.
It's to give money more
Right?
than
It means that every action should be the most perfect possible.
Well, at least in the Mulchama.
But in other words, an oiseh toiv.
Yeah.
It's not just that you do mitzvahs, that you're always looking for the best way that you could perform every mitzvah.
Outdo yourself.
In the Sur Meirah, you're staying away from even a trace of anything wrong. To do this battle, to compare this, to put energy and oomph in mitzvahs, it's like when people talk about, I'm sorry to go to an analogy that's for balabatim, you know? When you go to a hotel and they treat you specially, right? There's like a special way. You say, oh, over here it's personal, and they make a relationship, and it's a different type of service. They're doing, when a person does a mitzvah, that's not just to do it, but every part of it is in the nicest, in the most perfect way. That's the oiseh toiv. He's invested in doing the best that could be done. And that's why he says, in all mitzvahs, befrat v'davar shebemomen k'me'avedes hatzdaka chai gavne. When it comes to mitzvahs with money, not just to give meiser or to give, but really everything that's more than you need, absolutely need, not that you want, that you need to give away. Like a very, very high standard. Then he continues. Va'afilu, now this person who's the Beinoni, who's going through this calculation, the whole time he's saying, I don't sin. Says Alter Rebbe, let's take a look at that for a minute. Va'afilu b'bchina sur meira, even in staying away from evil. Also, this is something that I was taught in school. I didn't see this in any sforim, but there's an idea here. People make mistakes. Let's say a person, they studied halacha, but they didn't realize a certain thing, right? They didn't realize. So they're doing something wrong, but they're just unaware. So you can't say, oh, they're not a Beinoni, because they sinned. Their intention is to follow every single halacha. It's like someone told me that as a child, in their home, their mother used to bench licht early. And after candle lighting, husband and wife would sit down and have a glass of tea. It was an interesting custom. Then she got married. She lit the candles, and she waited for a cup of tea.
Never came.
And I said, what do you mean? You're not allowed to drink now. You lit candles, I said, what do you mean? This is the custom, the Jewish custom. That's what Jews do. They drink tea after you light candles. Right? So, A guy told me he was in yeshiva in Australia. There was a fellow that was becoming more religious. He was a chef, and they would go to his house every Friday night, and they would eat a meal. It was delicious food. And anyway, one night he was sitting there. It was Shabbos afternoon. One Shabbos afternoon, I don't remember how he said it, but he says, I used to have such a hard time getting ready on Friday. He says, then when I found out that for the men it's not by candle lighting, it was something about 18 minutes. But for him, 18 minutes meant that. So he was cooking Friday night, like he was preparing, like till 9:30 at night, I don't know. And then he would do 18 minutes, and then he would do Shabbos. Anyway, all the guys, they spit out the food. It was a party. Anyway, right? Sometimes a person who, I don't mean such an agree. I'm not.
So interesting, but that's how we
I'm not on the level, right? It's the same. But there is a certain element that if a person is unaware, you can't say, "Oh, you're not a Beinani." You could be a Beinani and still. That's why he says, Ish maskil, a person who really examines their actions and they learn and they're going to find that they're not perfect. No one's perfect. Let's take a look. Every wise person can limtza, you could find, you got to be a little creative. Limtza benafshe. He's not completely clean from Bakel Mikol Koil in every aspect. B'mokim Bakel Mikol Koil, all the kavim. In Chesed, in all. B'mokim shetzorech l'mochama tzuma kerech hanal. In those areas, basically, once in a while, he rests on his laurels. He takes a break. He's like, I davened, I learned, give me a vacation. And I feel pachas me'erech hanal. Don't even think it requires such a big test, even less. Kegoin, for instance, lahafsik be'emtza sicha noah. You're enjoying a nice shmooze. We learned before that you have to have iskafia. It's like you give a class. I'm sorry to say this. I'm self-incriminating right now. Right? You give a class. And you look around and let's say you say, oh, on the faces of my students, they're enjoying it. Let me indulge a little more. You already made the point. What are you're an orator or what? You're making a speech. It's a craft. Right? So, okay, you made the point. Go further. Sometimes a person could say something negative about someone else. That's not Lashon Hara, it's a border. It's very difficult to always be completely... Even a tiny... It's slightly negative. You mentioned that someone is a little careless. I don't know. It's not that...
But maybe like it could be an opinion from the person that is subject. And as they know, it's not like just.
Right. That what you're talking about, in the truth. Yeah. Afshu emes. He says, even if it's true, and even if the reason why you're saying it is va'afilu kedei lenakes atzmei. These are all like grades, right? Levels. You have a person. He says not nice. He doesn't say not nice, but a little. It's not 100% true. Then even if it's true, then even if he wants to vindicate himself. Someone's blaming you for something in the shul, right? I come into the shul. I say, who left the soda open? Why did you leave the soda? It wasn't me. It was.
That's a good example.
Right? It was the kid. It was this one. It was that. So even if it's lenakes atzmai, kenoida, we have a Gemara. What happened was Rabbeinu HaKadosh, who wrote the Mishnayos, he saw a bill of divorce, a get, and he didn't like the way it was written, and he thought that his son wrote it, so he was upset at him, and he said something to him disparagingly, and so he says, so Reb Shimon told his father, Lava no kasve, I didn't write it, Ella Yehuda Chayta Kasve. Yehuda, the tailor, wrote it, and it was true. Amalei Rabbeinu HaKadosh had a visceral reaction. Immediately he said, Kalach Malashon Hara, stop gossiping. Possibly Reb Shimon felt that if he doesn't tell his father who wrote it, he won't trust him. And here it's Kibud Avayim. He wants to honor his father. His father shouldn't be disappointed. So he told him, it wasn't me, it was the other guy. Ayin Shom, look in the Gemara at the end of the 10th Perek of Baba Basra. Rabbi Yisrael Friedman once told me, I don't know why it says the end of the Perek, it's not exactly then.
It's Reish.
He didn't have Reish Perek Yud. I don't know why it's not exactly the Reish, whatever it is. Uchahai Gavna, Kama Mili D'Shchicha. Similarly, there are other things that happen frequently. Ubefrat, especially B'inyan L'Kadosh Atzmei B'mutaloi, to have iskafia, to restrain ourselves in things that are permitted. Instead of having 6 scoops of ice cream for me, to have 5. Things like that. Shehu Medeiraisa, it's a biblical commandment. Kamesha Kosov, like it says in the Pasuk, Kadeshim Tiu v'Gomer, V'Iskadishtem v'Gomer, V'Gam, even those things that are not biblical. Divrei Seferim, Chamurim, Medivrei Torah, the rabbinics are more strict. You have to be more careful. Elo. Shekol Elu v'Kayetzav, and all of these things, Hein, these are me'avonis, these are the types of sins, Sha'adam dosh ba'akev, of people trot on them. People don't see them as being significant. They're dismissed. Big deal. Another spoon of cholent. A little more herring. Nu. V'gam nasu keheter. Over time, people don't even realize it's like almost a mitzvah. Machmas she'avar v'shana v'chulu, because he does it again and again, and he becomes accustomed. Aval be'emes, but the truth is, the next few words are very harsh. I need your. I'm going to try to go very quick. We'll go 3 minutes over. Well, I'll do it quick. Im hu yedei sefer, a person who's learned, a beinani who studies Torah all day. Umachzik b'teiras Hashem. That's the Im hu yedei sefer is the first level beinani. He works, but he knows how to learn. Machzik b'teiras Hashem, he studies all day. Kirvas alakim yechafetz, a beinani hamispalo kol hayem, a beinani who davens all day. If a person who is such a beinani doesn't serve Hashem at that level, Gadol Avenim Insay. Not only is this a sin, it's even worse than the Kal Shebakalim. It's almost unforgivable. V'ashmosei Gadla, his guilt is greater, bekifle kiflayim, doubly. V'mashe'ene nilcham mizgaber al yitzrei. Why don't you fight? Why don't I fight with my animal soul? Be'erech obchinas mulchama atzuma, now at that level. So it's much more egregious, it's worse than Ashmas Kal Shebakalim Yeshvei Kronis, from the guy that sits on the street corner.
Who's working harder?
Right.
Who's burning more?
They're far from Torah. They don't appreciate the distance. They don't realize. Their guilt is not, their liability is not so great. That they don't control their Yetzer Hara. Because God is kafir of heaven, who observes them. Their guilt is not as great ke'ashmas, like the guilt of kol hakorev, like those who are close to Hashem. Hakorev el Hashem, vel teirase v'avidase, they learn, they serve Him. Like the Gemara says, Gabi Acher, by Elisha ben Avuya, Hashem says, I can't forgive him. Sheyoda b'chveidi, he knows my glory, and now he went and he became a heretic. Not acceptable. For the Chain Amr Razal, that's also why the sages say, Al Am Ha'aretz, about ignorant people, Shez Doinis Nasolhem Kishgogis, that the sins that they do intentionally are considered like they did it by accident. Because they don't really understand the gravity of their sins. Now, I just want to say, before I let you go, we have to remember that everything the Alter Rebbe said here is a particular meditation for someone who's experiencing numbness of heart. In other words, obviously, of course, a person who does good things is better. Of course, in the natural world. In other words, you have people, they help other people, they do the right thing, they live as upright citizens. We're here to beat them up that they're not even greater? No. This is a focused meditation for someone who's trying to open his heart to confront numbness. He feels emotionally unavailable. So there's a place, there's a time to set aside to think about these things and say, you know what, in a certain way, at the deepest level, it's like right, to experience this at a level of pnimius, at the deep. In other words, how often do we investigate our motives so deeply? You know what I mean? It's like that's what we do. Everything we do, we're like, It's like, just live. You're doing good things. Yeah, really, this, that. No, you're doing good things. Without you, there wouldn't be a shir, obviously. And God willing, we'll see you next week. Thank you.